One of the biggest things that World War One showed the world was the new technology, and one of the reasons why it was unlike any war before it was because of this. They had to learn how to fight with this new technology, and they had modern weapons, but they were using old techniques. The old techniques centered around chivalry. To use that term to go all the way back there, that fighting on the battlefield was noble. To show your face to your enemy, to show them that you didn't have any fear, that you were going to wear your country's colors and wave your flag and march into battle in nice neat rows, and it was going to be clearly clear who your enemy was. And you may die on the field, you may not, but there was a good chance that you were going to survive because weapons were primitive, and you might get wounded, you might lose a limb or an appendage or whatever, but I mean, there's a pretty good chance you might come out alive. Not now. You walk into battle in these modern battlefields, and if you go in there marching side by side, all of you are going to be dead. And that was the biggest change that people had to learn from, and that's what of course led to trench warfare. Machine guns, poisonous gases, tanks, airplanes, and submarines all were used for the first time. And what we see here is that the militarism sets in where you face an impossible enemy, whether it be they have something that you don't have or whatever. You have to counter with that by either making something like it or making something better. And so we see, the Germans were the leaders in all these things, and so they're seen as kind of the bad guys. But then the other side, they say, well, we have to do the same thing, or we're going to be beaten. So techniques had to change, and this led to trench warfare. War was seen as not honorable anymore. You were not seeing your enemy's face. You were hiding. You were literally hiding and waiting for your enemy to pop up out of their trench and do something crazy like run at you between a trench. And so that's the war. The battles lasted for months and not just a few days as they had in the past. So what effect is this going to have on the actual fighting? The loss of life is going to be huge. More people died in this war than had in all the wars before it. It was we've talked about wars that lasted 100 years, 30 years, 7 years, whatever. And so the casualty rate is going to be extremely high. Um, on top of that, it's going to take a longer time because I'm going to be dug in here and I'm going to not let you pass. And here's an example of what we're talking about here. Is that this is a German trench line right here. And if you're French or British or whoever, you had to come out of your trenches, which look similar to this, and step out of this hole and run for 50 to 100 yards in churned up craters and mud and all this stuff, all while being shot at, and make it to your enemy's trench. And then by some miracle, um, find a way to beat them in their trench. And then it wasn't just one; it was in this case three. And you had massive guns shooting at you from several kilometers away, and you had airplanes flying over and gas bombs going off. It was just utter chaos, hell on earth. And once you were told to get out of your trench, you had to go. Some of the footage that you're going to see in the clips I gave you is that they always assigned a couple people to stay back in the trench, and that they were told that if anybody came back to the trench to shoot them on sight, it didn't matter if it was your own man or not, because no retreat was accepted. That's what they were deciding. That's what it's called, no man's land. Nobody wanted to be there. And here's several pictures of what life was like there. These guys lived here. They lived in these trenches, and you see the guns lined up. They're waiting for an enemy to come, and they spent weeks and weeks here, and you can imagine the diseases and the death rate that was caused by just the unsanitary conditions here, and the boredom that they had. Here's several pictures here, and this is a picture of no man's land. You see the dead body and the smoke and the debris, and you're expected to run full speed with a gun in your hand and all this equipment on you in the middle of mud and churned up everything. and this is what's waiting for you. You had to find a way to get these guys out of the trenches. And so the clips that I've given you on my website are Gallipoli, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Warhorse, which Warhorse is a different clip in the fact that it doesn't show trench warfare. It just shows the use of horses in battle at the beginning of the war, and just the the cringe factor that you have as far as that's concerned. And Gallipoli is about the Australians fighting against the Ottomans in at the Dardanelles, right between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. And All Quiet on the Western Front is the most famous book. That's a true story written about one man's life on the Western Front, as it from the German perspective. Now, here's the most famous British plane, and you see the German the tri-wing there. That's the Red Baron. But you see these two things. Why were these used in warfare? Initially, it was seen, okay, you could use it as surveillance. You could sit there and look at your enemy. But if you're worried about getting people out of a trench, well, you've got to come up with a way to fly over them and drop bombs on them. Well, these planes were so primitive and so weak as far as the horsepower is concerned that they couldn't carry heavy payloads. And these guys, you gotta understand, these things were made mostly out of wood and canvas, so they weren't real safe to go up and expect to carry a lot of bombs, and or Lord help you get shot at and even nicked. What would happen to you? So these guys literally flew over the trenches and would have what amounted to a grenade or a stick of dynamite in their laps, and would fly low enough um, to literally throw bombs down on the man below them. And you can imagine the problems with that. Well, then your enemy's not going to sit there and let you do that, so they're going to come up with airplanes to come and try to knock you out of the air. And that's where you have the word dogfighting, where you have planes fighting against each other designed to shoot the other down. And that's where we first starting to see it. And it's very primitive and very slow, and it's not truly effective, but the potential is seen. And here's the machine gun. This is really the star of World War One, if you want to call it that, where you had to have this to be successful. This is where the Russians lacked the technology to have something to counter the Maxim machine gun and the American version of the Browning. This is not like the AK or the M60 that you see in war movies where you're carrying around on your hip. These things were very heavy and cumbersome. It took two people to operate, and you set it up in one static position. So and you even had a hose that injected water to cool the barrel so it wouldn't warp or jam. Another way to get at somebody out of a trench is by throwing gas on them. It was called mustard gas, which was called for the yellowish cloud of that was emitted from it. And anthrax was another um, poisonous gas that was used. And any exposed skin, orifice really, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, those would begin to bleed if they were not covered properly, and that's why you had to have a gas mask readily available. And what would happen usually is that your eyes would go first, and then you're in the middle of a battle and you can't see, you get shot and killed. But if you did survive being blinded, you were probably blinded for life, but you could recover from that. But if you survived that and you inhaled the gas, you would drown on your own blood. And so it was a brutal way to die. And so once again, this is a way to get men out of their trench or get them distracted. And why has it been forbidden since? It has been outlawed. I know that sounds crazy to use this in warfare, because it is seen as um, an unseen weapon, and so to speak, and also it can affect the groundwater and it can affect civilians, and so it is not seen as a method of warfare to this day. And it was made illegal after World War One. Tanks were also used in a primitive way, and you can see these things extremely slow, extremely large, and they would roll over on their backs and get jammed up in no man's land and all that stuff, and so they weren't very, very useful. But you can see how, once again, like the airplane, how the potential was there. And then submarines. And the German name for submarine starts with the letter U. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it's called U-boat. Um, and so the Germans mastered these, and they were extremely effective in just making anybody on the waters fear the Germans. And of course, the Lusitania is a great example of that. And that's and there were very very heavy restrictions placed on these after the war. And so that's what the question is: are these fair? Why or why not? And so something that's unseen. Once again, you can't see it, so therefore, how can you defend against it? And so that's where you get things like sonar and radar are invented to try to figure out where these things are. All right, and that brings this episode to a close.